Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Task Force on the Americas webinar. My name is Rick Sterling. I'm president of the board at TFA. Usually we have an annual dinner every year in September to early October. This year that's not possible, so we're happy to be hosting this webinar with 4 great speakers on 4 critical countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. If this is successful, we hope to be doing more of these webinars that can be educational, informational, and support our work and support the people who work with us on educating American people and to push for changes in U.S. foreign policy. But first of all, we'd like to introduce you to Task Force on the Americas. Our treasurer and longtime member, Carol Costa, is going to tell you a little bit about TFA before we go on to our first guest speaker. So welcome, Carol Costa.
Thank you. Welcome to everyone. I'm so happy that so many people have joined us on this occasion. And I wish to give a special welcome to our guest speakers. I am very proud of the Task Force on the Americas, and it began as MITF, Marin Interfaith Task Force on Central America, formed in 1985 by a group of religious denominations in Marin that wanted to give refuge to people fleeing the civil war in El Salvador, and to support the Non-Governmental Human Rights Commission of El Salvador. The offices of this commission were being bombed, and their people were being arrested, tortured, imprisoned, and even killed. Some MITF volunteer accompaniers to the Human Rights Commission at great risk smuggled very important evidence, documents and photos out of El Salvador and brought them to Marin. With this material, in February of 1990, the US Senator Barbara Boxer gave an impassioned press conference in Washington, D.C., and distributed copies of a booklet published by Marin Interfaith Task Force to all members of Congress. During this same period, we had our members were also in Nicaragua supporting the Sandinistas and the revolution. We actively participated in many Pastors for Peace caravans going to Central America, Chiapas, and Cuba. We supported them by supplying medical and school supplies in colorfully painted, renovated school buses. We supported the Zapatistas in Mexico starting in 1994. And we became involved in supporting the Lavalas movement and President Aristide in Haiti. With the rising of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, we became more aware of the countries in South America. And at that point, we changed our name to the MITF or TFA Task Force on the Americas. We were very excited about what was happening in Venezuela. Both Venezuela and Honduras have been such extreme and painful examples of US imperialism. They are very present, ongoing struggles, and as are others in Colombia, Bolivia, Haiti, and other countries too. To boast a little, we have organized delegations to almost all countries in the Southern Hemisphere, And we have met proudly with such presidents as Pepe Mujica of Uruguay, Daniel Ortega, and Hugo Chavez. Every year we have held an annual dinner around this time, and I have always looked forward to that very much. It was such a warm occasion and with great, exciting, knowledgeable speakers. Well, we can't have the dinner this year, but here are the speakers.
Thank you, Carol. Our first speaker is Nan McCurdy. Nan is United Methodist missionary. She has been a resident of Nicaragua since 1985. She has a Nicaraguan husband and children. Nan is also active and lives part of the time in Puebla, Mexico, where she works with the rural poor. Nan is the editor of the excellent weekly publication NicaNotes, and she's also teamed up with other historians and investigators and activists to produce 2 books. We will be telling all of the registrants. We will send information and details about Nan's books and other resources and information which may be of interest to people after this event. So with that, please, we'd like to welcome Nan McCurdy.
Everyone, it's really an honor to be part of this important event today, especially knowing that your organization was active in the 80s, was in solidarity with the revolution, and was working hard to try to stop Reagan's war. As Rick said, my husband, Miguel Mairena, and all my kids are Nicaraguan. My first husband, Philip Mitchell, was from San Diego. He was in the Peace Corps in Chile. It's actually in the 2nd and 3rd year of Peace Corps. And because of his relationship with Chile, he knew very, very well what happens to a country that tries to make life better for their people. Which often doesn't make things better for US corporations, and that's where they get into trouble. Phil died in 1991, but in the 80s, he and I were part of a United Methodist church in Baltimore, and we were very active on Central American issues. And together with others, we started a faith-based sistering relationship between Baltimore, or really all of Maryland, and San Juan de Limay. So we moved there thinking that our primary work would be to host groups, and we certainly hosted hundreds of people there in the 80s. But what we quickly found was that the most important thing was to be in pastoral accompaniment with the people, because virtually every family had lost a member in Reagan's war. Just one example, one of our dearest friends, a Catholic delegate of the word, Tranquilino Garmendi, and his wife Maxima, lost 3 teenage sons. A 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, and an 18-year-old were kidnapped. And to this day, they still know nothing. What we could do was just be there and listen to everyone. And as you all know, the Contra, Reagan's Contra, focused on attacking, targeting, kidnapping, killing anyone who was bringing life to the community. Doctors, nurses, health workers, people working on roads, communication lines, delegates of the word, etc. And the war was cruel. It went on for many years. And in 1990, when the elections were coming up, the first George Bush made it clear to everyone that if they voted for the Sandinistas, the US war would continue. So the people cried uncle, voted out the Sandinistas, and thus began nearly 17 years of 3 neoliberal governments. Austerity measures, privatization. Just in the first few years of the 90s, more than $7 billion of the people's property, we say state property, but that's our property, was privatized, sold for fire sale prices. Eventually, healthcare, education were also privatized. By 2006, the last year of this period, the country was really falling apart. We had 8 to 12 hour blackouts, electricity blackouts every day, which meant we were lucky to have 6 hours of water at night. So not surprisingly, the people voted out the neoliberals and voted back in the Sandinistas after 17 years. So since then, the last 14 years, what has happened? What the government and the people have been able to bring about is truly a second or third phase of the revolution. And I want to share a little bit about that because I know you don't hear a lot about this in the US press. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. The size of the economy in 2006 was 6.7 billion, and today it is 12.5 billion. Since 2006, extreme poverty has been reduced by more than half, poverty in general by about half. Electricity in homes has gone from 54% to 98.5% this year. Potable water has gone up to 93%, connection to sewage from 35 to 55%. Infant mortality has gone down from 29 to 11 per 100,000. Maternal mortality has gone way down from 92.8 to 29.9 per 100,000. There were 50 maternal wait homes out in the boonies in 2006, and today there are 178. Chronic malnutrition in children under 5 and in children 6 to 14 has been cut in half, or in the case of the 6 to 14, cut really a lot more than in half. Electricity from renewables, which is just one of the many things that Nicaragua has done that we could do in the States if we put our minds to it, was 20% in 2006, and today it's 65 or even 80% during periods of time when there's a lot of wind. Let's talk about food sovereignty and nutrition. In Nicaragua today, there is about 90% food sovereignty. During the 2018 coup, with more than 1,000 roadblocks, people didn't go hungry. And that's because you had small farmers everywhere who were producing for the local population. The World Food Program says Nicaragua has a priority on guaranteeing food security, and it praises the school meal program that reaches at least 1.2 million children from preschool on every year. A September World Bank report says that a child in Nicaragua has a 98% chance of living to age 5, one of the highest in Latin America. In August, the IMF praised Nicaragua's programs that strengthen social safety net with food packages for vulnerable families. Production bonds have gone to 213,796 families, which is well over 1 million people, through zero hunger since 2007. This goes to stimulate the popular economy and help small farmers produce more. And it's why we are so high now on food sovereignty. Advances for women. Nicaragua is 5th in the world in gender equity behind Sweden. It has the highest level of gender parity in ministerial positions in Latin America, 55.6%. There are 33 women's police stations with highly trained staff. 13 more are under construction. Nicaragua has the lowest rate of femicides in Central America, 0.7 per 100,000, still too many. It has one of the lowest homicide rates in Latin America and the lowest by far in Central America. The government has given low interest loans to more than 800,000 women for small businesses. Investment in social structure. Those who haven't been to Nicaragua since the 80s, you wouldn't recognize it. Nicaragua ranks second in Latin America in social infrastructure. It ranks third in all Latin America in drinking water quality, energy, meaning electricity, and transportation, with a huge investment in roads, electricity, and water. It has the best access to potable water in the region. It ranks first in Central America in best roads. Nicaragua subsidizes basic grains, transportation, electricity, and water for the more vulnerable population. Nicaragua has a very high transparency in public debt with full data on each institution's website about execution of its loans. Another bank says that Nicaragua praises Nicaragua for its excellent execution of loans. In 2020, it has the lowest debt per capita in Central America, and its exports grew by 14.1% in the first half of 2020. These last 2 points really show what a good decision they made in not shutting the country down, not closing the borders. Free and universal health care. These are just some of the new hospitals that have been built or are being built. Health spending increased by 318% from 2006 to 2020. Nicaragua ranks fourth in all Latin America in health investment. 40 cents of every dollar is spent on health and education. 18 state-of-the-art hospitals have been built since 2007. 7 more hospitals are currently being built. Health personnel has increased dramatically from 22,000 to 36,000. There are now 143 major health clinics, 1,333 health posts, and 80 mobile clinics. There is a new molecular biology lab and an influenza vaccine plant that may well be producing COVID vaccines within a year or so. A new health program is taking specialists and special tests like ultrasounds directly to all the neighborhoods. They began this program in August because they could see that because of COVID, people who needed to go to the health center or go to the hospital weren't because of fear. So they decided we'll take it all to them. There's 70 natural medicine clinics for pain management. There's cancer radiation centers that have linear accelerators, which are the modern accelerators used for radiation in countries like the US. Nicaragua now does kidney transplants and provides dialysis, unfortunately, to many people because there's a high level of kidney failure in Nicaragua. COVID preparedness. Nicaragua disinfected public spaces like markets and buses. Nicaragua was one of the first countries in the world to create a comprehensive plan for dealing with COVID prevention, containment, and treatment. It prepared 19 hospitals for treating COVID and prepared 37,000 medical staff and more than 150,000 volunteer health workers. It has stringent screening at all the entrances to the country and does careful follow-up to make sure people are doing their quarantine. When we went in March, we were getting phone calls from doctors every other day. The IMF said COVID-19 cases were treated in accordance with international protocols. Nicaragua implemented a national alert and a 24/7 hotline. 5 million home visits for education, prevention, and detection were done by personnel, health personnel, and volunteers. This is a list, but it's in Spanish, kind of showing all the advances. Nicaragua has free and universal education. There is a 94% approval rating from 1.7 million students and their parents. More than 7,700 schools were built or rebuilt and equipped since 2007. We've already talked about the school meals. There are now 500 rural secondary schools, so village kids can more easily study high school. The government provides free books, backpacks, and materials to over 1 million children. A monetary bonus is given to high school graduates. There's constant teacher training. English language teaching is available from first grade on. There are more than 500 schools now with internet access, and there is free Wi-Fi in most parks throughout the nation. They also have 280 mobile classrooms. So the question is, why the coup in 2018? With these amazing advances and the high percentage of people voting for the Sandinistas, more than 62% in 2011, 72.5% in 2016, the US decided to try to take power by force in 2018. They spent millions of dollars to oppose the Sandinistas, of course, in all the elections since 1984. And since the Sandinistas won in 2006, the US has spent millions to create and support opposition NGOs, non-governmental organization, and opposition media. For example, as a result of US funding, there are at least 25 TV and radio stations, syndicated shows, and slick news websites that freely spew anti-Sandinista propaganda. A USAID document leaked, amazingly enough, from the US Embassy in June shows $31 million was given to the opposition between December 2017 and May 2020 through USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy. There's also money that has been given through many other US groups, but this is the most recent document we have made by USAID. You may have heard about a smoking gun of US intervention called RAIN, Responsive Assistance to Nicaragua. It is another USAID Terms of Reference document to contract a US company to head up the current and future destabilization plan through the elections. It describes many different destabilization scenarios through the 2021 elections. It's clear the US wants to get rid of the Sandinista government, but it's also clear they want to simply do away with Sandinistas. The aggression is on top of the sanctions that are now making it much more difficult for the country to get loans. RAIN is a plan to destroy public order with actions, both violent and otherwise, before, during, and after the 2021 elections. And it is a shocking example of illegal interference in another nation's internal affairs. The document describes a scenario where the Sandinistas win in free and fair elections and receive international approval. In this case, the US will continue their destabilization plans. If their candidate were to win, the document says they must submit to US policies, completely change the army, the police, the judicial system, for example. And they talk about persecuting Sandinistas, which is exactly what was done during the coup attempt. It's interesting to me to note that the US realizes the Sandinistas are likely to win in free and fair elections. They also talk about trying to use the OAS like they did in Bolivia in their elections. And in the last few days, the Secretary General of the OAS, who has very much done what the US has wanted him to do, has said conditions don't exist for free and fair elections in Nicaragua. So now we know the US is going to have its opposition abstain and focus on unconventional warfare. From the document, we know the US hoped that Nicaragua would have a lot of problems with COVID that they could then take advantage of. In other words, their plan counted on the development of unrest related to COVID-19. In line with this, since March, the US directed opposition focused most of their attention on telling lies in the media about how the government was handling the COVID. That strategy had some success internationally, but not much at home. And since Nicaragua has managed COVID so well and has the lowest mortality rate in Central America, the opposition is now on to new topics. Finally, as many of you probably will agree, I haven't seen an honest article about Nicaragua in the US press in many years, so it's important to find alternative sources like NicaNotes, Council on Hemispheric Affairs, Popular Resistance, and others. And it's very important to go there, whether you organize and go with a delegation or whether you take your family and just go on a vacation. I can give you ideas about any of those things, and I'll include a few in the document that Rick is gonna send out. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nan. That was very informative.
Now
Sorry?
I've got to stop sharing.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Nan. Very informative, and as Nan says, we'll be sending out some good information in an email to all registrants. Our next speaker is Pierre Labossiere. He is well known in the Bay Area as being one of the leading forces in the Haitian Solidarity movement. He's a vital force in Haiti Action Committee and Haiti Emergency Relief Fund. And he's going to tell us about Haiti. Welcome, Pierre.
Okay. All right, now you can hear me. Thank you so much. Very excited to be part of this webinar. I missed the dinners as well, and fun dinners. But it was great to hear Nan speak about Nicaragua, and it pretty much mirrors the many advancements that were occurring in Haiti, even though things were a bit further. We were on our way to accomplishing a lot of things, but immediately, as soon as the government of President Aristide in 2000, first in 1991, and later on the second government came in 2001, the US set in motion coup d'etats, and Haiti is an example. Haiti should be studied as a typical example of how they have, when I say they, I mean the US, and I was glad to hear and talk about the OAS, the Organization of American States, as well. They were very much a part.
For sure, man, it's like us versus I've been like keeping like a numerical tally in my head, like how many is the fucking OAS bringing? They're bringing 30 people. So we just gotta get 30 or 20. 20 is fine because we're worth at least 1.5 OAS.
Is that?
I think the host can mute David's whole screen if they wanted. I think the hosts have the power to do that.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's David.
He was just muted.
Yeah. Go ahead, Pierre.
Yes, and so what has happened is the US has used the Organization of American States, same as they had done to Cuba in the early 60s, in order to try to subvert the Cuban Revolution. So in Haiti as well, they proceeded with using the OAS against President Aristide's government. And they were successful in doing that. And they are still using the OAS to subvert the efforts of the people of Haiti to counter the coup that took place in 2004, the most recent coup. And so what we've seen is that the number, I was very happy to see Nan put the figures. These are fantastic. We do have a brochure called We Will Not Forget. When I say we, the Haiti Action Committee has put together a brochure called We Will Not Forget, the Achievements of Lavalas in Haiti. And this is a brochure that talks about what was achieved in the 10-year of democratic interlude when President Aristide returned to Haiti from the first coup. That was in 1994. Then he only spent about 18, no, maybe 15 months in office. And there was the government of René Préval that came in, not as committed to change as the Aristide government had been. But in 3 years, from 2001 to 2004, the second Aristide government came in. And the way they were able to use our tax money, the way they were able to use to mobilize the nation, to create, to build schools, to build hospitals, and create a lot of openings. And that you mentioned about the women. In Haiti, one of the steps that the Aristide government took was to disband the military, because the military had been put in place, similar to Nicaragua, like a Guardia Civil, had been put in place following the US occupation of Haiti in 1915 to 1934. And since then, it's been a mercenary military, really at the service of US interests and against the masses of our people. And it used to stage coups d'etats and massacre people and what have you. And so President Aristide, on his return from exile, he disbanded the military, taking the 40% of the national budget that used to go to those killers and invested it in building schools and hospitals and creating basic infrastructure for our farmers, for the peasants of Haiti to have access to credit, to have access to land, to have access to seeds and tools, and to increase production. And also the headquarters of the Haitian military was decommissioned and used and given over to the women's movement, creating the Ministry for Women's Affairs. So there was significant investment in people. As a matter of fact, the program of Famille Avalas was called Investir dans l'humain, which means investing in people. And Haiti was moving very, very fast. Now, what happened in 2004? There was a coup, a major coup that took place. And that coup took away the literacy program that had been set up that was doing wonders in the country, the education, the investment in education, where most of the students were being subsidized by 70%. And all of that was reduced and taken away, no more literacy program. There was a significant reduction in the budget for education from about 20% down now. It's been down to less than by 11% right now. And reduction also in healthcare from 16%, and now the healthcare is about 4%, what's spent on healthcare. And this is all called the neoliberal plan, very similar to what happened in Chile. What they had done is destroy the government of Allende and ushered in these neoliberal policies. And the same thing has happened in Haiti. And right now, what do we have? The worst conditions ever economically for the people of Haiti. So people are not taking it lying down. People are resisting. They resisted the coup of 2004. They've been resisting what's going on, and they are facing massive, massive repression and massacres. I have to mention here that one of the lessons from the 2004 coup in Haiti is the way that they have used the United Nations. I mentioned earlier the Organization of American States, but also the way that they have used the United Nations as a fig leaf for the US, France, Canada, who are the major players, seconded by Brazil, who they gave the job of being in charge of the military occupation of Haiti. And they roped in a number of countries in Latin America, including some, sad to say, who call themselves socialists, to the exception of Venezuela and Cuba, who participated in forming this colonial army that was restoring, that was subjugating our people. And this is no hyperbole. There were many massacres conducted, at least I can think of 4 that were conducted by UN, by troops from those different countries under the flag of the United Nations. And what was it about? It was about people going into the streets from Cité Soleil, from all the impoverished neighborhoods, all the impoverished communities, and those governments, those UN forces in helicopter gunships would fire on the people. Now imagine, little shacks being fired upon in the wee hours of the morning. We have the videos. There's a video called What's Going On in Haiti, and it's about that. There is footage of those massacres taking place. And to this day, nobody has been brought up on charges to account for these atrocities. This has been going on since 2004. And now we are in 2020. So it's going to be 17 years of this occupation. Right now, the UN supposedly has left, is no longer occupying Haiti, but we all know that it's a change, that it's a wordplay. It's a game that's taking place because through the new, as they call the new United Nations presence, they are in charge of policies, everything that goes on by the Haitian government and everywhere. They have trained the Haitian police for the past 16, 17 years of their presence in Haiti. They supply it, they finance it. And so the Haitian police today is one of the most brutal in the Americas in terms of disregard for the people's lives. People are not accepting this laying down. They've been demonstrating. Students are taking to the streets. They've been in massive protest of what has been going on. Teachers, farmers, what they have set up in Haiti right now, they call it gangs. You see, let me share with you how tricky this system has been. When you look at the corporate media in the US, they talk about, gang violence in Haiti. Once they say that, they know people are going to say, the government in Haiti, they are besieged by gangs, it's overwhelming. But the gangs are actually government organized death squads that they are financed, they are given weapons. It's not me saying it, it's the very leaders of those so-called gangs, who I prefer to call death squads, who get on the radio sometimes and say those things. And they show off their brand new assault rifles. They show off their weaponry. They show off their boxes of ammunition, brand new. And they show them off and they say that we got them from government officials and those people. So in the US press, when they are massacring people, setting fire to their homes, as happened, the most recent was last weekend, about a week ago, in the community of Bel Air, as they set fire to those houses, then people assume it's gang violence. And that means, the government can't do too much, it's gang violence. However, they are the ones who are doing it. Really what is being implemented in Haiti, it's the old Duvalier model for people who may be too young, who may not know. Papa Doc Duvalier had instituted a system of death squads that they call the Tonton Marcoutes. It was modeled after Hitler's SS. It was modeled after Mussolini's brown shirts or black shirts, whichever, however and even the name closely resembled what was going on in Italy at the time. The official name was Volunteers for National Security, and everybody knew them as the Tonton Marcoutes. And they started as with hoods over their heads to terrorize the population, and later on they became officialized. And this is what's going on today in Haiti. The US has been, it's interesting listening to Nan speak, how they are saying, well, the elections in Nicaragua are no good and they are opposed to elections there. Well, in Haiti, as people are being killed, as massacres are being conducted, both in the rural areas of Haiti, or where our farmers are being dispossessed of their land and are being killed by those death squads, in the cities, where members of the working class, in the impoverished communities, are being assassinated. Student leaders, as of Friday, one student leader was actually shot to death by the palace security guards of Jovenel Moïse, and they shot him in the back. When they took his body to the hospital for 4 hours, he received no care and bled to death. His name is Gregory Saint-Hilaire. So in that respect, we connect also with the Black Lives Matter movement in the US because we see the connections of the militarized police to repress people and terrorize communities. It's the same being applied whether it's in Haiti or in other countries of the Americas and everywhere that it's happening. And the very purpose of that is to quash popular resistance. It's to make people be fearful. It's to make people, just like the dirty wars in Argentina, it's to make people in Central America and the Americas, it's to make people fearful and continue so that a little minority can continue to take the resources of those countries, to steal their resources, and don't have to invest in giving people what the people are demanding in terms of healthcare, clean water, decent life, wages that they can live on and whatever. So I will close right now, but it's just to let you know that I want to say thank you to Task Force on the Americas, because you have been, your work of solidarity has been phenomenal over the many years. We in Haiti, Haiti was founded, as many of you know, in 1804 as a result of an uprising by enslaved Africans who said to the world that they are human beings and they are not going to tolerate slavery. They broke their chains and many were killed, but eventually they succeeded. And the new nation of Haiti declared itself a sanctuary nation. Very important. Sanctuary nation, offering refuge and freedom and citizenship to anyone, to all freedom fighters and anyone fleeing from oppression. And Haiti was supported a number of revolutionaries throughout South America, and Haiti supported a number of revolutionaries in the US as well, people who stood like Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser, who stood against slavery. And Haiti asked Simon Bolivar, when he came to Haiti seeking help, that Haiti would support him with the condition that he should abolish slavery everywhere and anywhere. And we've stood in solidarity with everyone. And I have to say this, I have to pay tribute to the Polish troops. Napoleon had sent a contingent of Polish soldiers to fight against the African and participate in the enslavement of the Africans. But the Polish troops, once they set foot and they realized the nature of the struggle, similar to the San Patricio Brigade in Mexico, they joined with the Africans and turned their guns against the troops of Napoleon. So today that's my appeal to you, to continue with your great work of solidarity. Let us learn from each other so that we don't discount other countries. Oh, this country is not important or that country is not important, because the lessons as they are being imposed, the lessons of our suffering of benefit to each other. And the more we can share our successes, the stories of our successes, as well as our defeats, the stronger we'll be and the more together we can act to make this world a better place. So thank you all so much. And we can share where you can get our website. It's HaitiSolidarity.net. And also the Haiti Emergency Relief Fund will give you information such as the webinar we had on August 8th with Mrs. Mildred Aristide. It's there at HaitiEmergencyRelief.org. And you'll get tons of information from those. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Pierre. And I want to tell, included with the information we're going to be sending out is a link to a video which Pierre showed me recently that is very good. Our next speaker is Ricardo Vaz. He's a true citizen of the world. He was born and grew up in Mozambique. He's lived in Europe. He got his PhD at Stony Brook University of New York. And for a number of years, he's been in Venezuela, and he's working as a writer at the excellent Venezuela Analysis. And he is with us on the line, but we have a very poor connection. And fortunately, he was thinking ahead, and Ricardo sent us a pre-recorded video, so we've got his talk on video. I'm getting some messages that my own internet here in Walnut Creek is a little bit spotty. So I'm hoping that that's not going to be an issue. You wouldn't think that Walnut Creek would be experiencing this, but we are. But let's see, I'm going to try to play the pre-recorded video of Ricardo Bosch.
If you're seeing this recorded message, it means that we had to resort to our plan B because my connection was not up to the task, and I apologize for that. So I'll be talking about Venezuela. I'd like to thank the Task Force on the Americas on behalf of Venezuelan Nazis for the invitation. My title is Sanctions and Popular Resistance in Venezuela. When we talk about US intervention, we should never lose sight of the military option, which has been openly floated by many people, including Trump himself. And the threat is never far away. You know, there are US ships in the Caribbean Sea, there are military drills in Colombia all the time. But I'd like to talk about the war that's already going on, which takes the form of sanctions, or, I mean, if we wanted to be rigorous, we'd call them unilateral coercive measures. So the story of US hostility against Venezuela really goes back to the first day of President Chavez, more than 20 years ago. But I'd like to focus on the most recent chapter of this story, which starts in 2015 with Executive Order 13692. This became known in these parts as the Obama Decree. So this is the executive order that declares Venezuela an unusual and extraordinary threat to US national security. Something that sounds, of course, very absurd, but absurd or not, this is what established the legal basis for all the measures that followed. And the first significant escalation was in the summer of 2017, when the Treasury Department imposed financial sanctions against state-owned company PDVSA. And then it escalated even further in 2019, after the self-proclamation of opposition leader Juan Guaido as quote-unquote interim president, and the US really wanted to force a coup, and that meant that sanctions escalated very significantly. So in January 2019, there was an oil embargo, so basically no deals with the Venezuelan oil sector were allowed. And throughout the year, all sectors of the Venezuelan economy were targeted. For example, the Venezuelan Central Bank was targeted. Later on, there was a very blatant attack against the CLAP. The CLAP is the subsidized food program. And then in August, this was upgraded to a full-fledged Cuba style, we could call it, embargo, basically prohibiting any dealings with any Venezuelan state entities. But then in 2020, this was further escalated by the imposition of what are known as secondary sanctions. So whereas the ones I was talking about before only referred to US companies, in 2020 the US went after foreign companies for dealing with the Venezuelan oil sector, in this case the Russian company Rosneft. Then the Treasury also targeted what are known as swap deals. So these are essentially deals in which most of the times the Venezuelan state-owned company PDVSA exchanges crude for something like fuel or diluents for refining fuel, so as to avoid going through the financial markets. These were also targeted, and the US threatened the companies that were doing these deals that they had to stop. Then they also went after shipping companies, so forcing them to stop transporting Venezuelan oil. And finally, I'd also like to talk about individual sanctions, which are always a nice excuse for the media to say that the US only targets high-ranking officials. But in fact, these measures also have an effect that's called overcompliance, which is that companies do not want to get into business with sanctioned individuals or companies out of fear of getting in trouble with the Treasury Department. And you might have noticed in everything I've been saying so far, the main target has been the Venezuelan oil sector, and this has been openly recognized by the people in charge of this policy, like Elliot Abrams. And the result has been a very drastic fall in Venezuela's oil production, and this is very serious because this is the main source of income for the country. So it fell from almost 2 million barrels a day when these first financial sanctions were imposed against PDVSA in the summer of 2017 to something like 350,000 3 years later. So this has been a drastic fall with very serious consequences, as you can imagine. So what have been the consequences of sanctions? There's a report that was published by the Center for Economic and Policy Research last year, and it uses the expression, which I don't think is controversial at all, that sanctions are a form of collective punishment. And so according to their estimations, the August 2017 sanctions were responsible for 40,000 deaths in 12 months alone. So you can extrapolate from that point. And essentially it puts the most at-risk groups at an even higher risk. So for example, HIV and diabetic patients which need constant treatment were left without medicines because Venezuela could not access these medicines, either because it no longer had income to do so, or because in some cases the shipments were directly blocked. Also, in other cases, the shipments are not blocked, but they are delayed, and this, for example, results in outbreaks of diseases that had been under control because the vaccines did not arrive in time, stuff like this. And in the current context, this has meant also an uphill battle to face the coronavirus, even though the Venezuelan government has managed to do so much better than its neighbors. Two other aspects we could mention are damaged infrastructure and public services, like my internet connection. Essentially, Venezuelan public companies cannot access repair parts, and so the infrastructure becomes much more strained. And the most recent consequence has been fuel shortages, which have been very severe in recent months because of everything that we've been saying so far. And also because the US has made an explicit point of forbidding companies from selling fuel to Venezuela because they are aware that this is going to paralyze the country and result in very severe difficulties. So now to understand a bit more on how sanctions work and how they really hurt the Venezuelan state, one of the consequences has been that lots of assets that Venezuela had abroad have been frozen or blocked, essentially from the point when the US decided that the Venezuelan president was not the person elected by the Venezuelan people in the May 2018 elections, but some other person they decided. And this has meant some 10 to 15 billion worth of assets frozen that the Venezuelan state no longer has access to. The most significant one is Citgo. Citgo is the subsidiary of state-owned company PDVSA in the US. There's also the very controversial case in which the Bank of England simply refused to return the gold that Venezuela had deposited there. Also several accounts in international banks that were used for imports and all sorts of transactions have been frozen. And perhaps more significant is the income that I was mentioning that Venezuela simply lost. So for example, just the oil embargo in January 2019 at this point, Venezuela was exporting 500,000 barrels of oil per day to the United States alone. And the imposition of this embargo has meant that Venezuela lost $30 million of income per day. So that's some 11 billion a year. And also all the other measures I was talking about increase the cost of doing business, either because to export oil now Venezuela has to assume the shipping costs, or because companies want to dodge US sanctions and then they have to triangulate with other companies. This also makes the cost of doing business much higher. So moving on, as part of our work in Venezuelan analysis, we cannot stop ourselves from discussing the role of the media, which is not a small actor in this game. So if I had to summarize it, the US media is as uncritical as it gets when it comes to foreign policy, and perhaps in no other case is it more uncritical than when it comes to Venezuela. It resorts to lies and half-truths and a general kind of reporting that's very biased, and which we have exposed in lots of pieces. So for example, one of the tricks that's very commonly used is, rather than saying that sanctions have been responsible for this and that, say, Maduro blames sanctions for this and that. So we spent a lot of time demonizing Maduro. So now you can just safely say that Maduro blames sanctions in the hope that the reader is not going to take it as seriously. And in this policy that the media simply accepts everything that the foreign policy apparatus says without any questioning, it has allowed for lots of unproven things to just be established. For example, the famous Cartel of the Suns, which nobody has ever heard about, is now for a common feature for U.S. foreign policy against Venezuela, in making some wild accusations that Venezuela is guilty of narco-terrorism and stuff like that. There have also been unproven links to Hezbollah. But since this is always accepted in such an uncritical fashion, what it does is it creates a background narrative that is then used to justify US policy. So now the US is not imposing untold suffering on all Venezuelans, but rather punishing people that are drug traffickers or they have ties with terrorists, even though none of that has been proven, and most of that can be proven as false. Now to the second part of my title, which is popular resistance. This is actually the part that's most interesting, but unfortunately we have to spend time discussing the rest. So the Venezuelan people have not taken the US aggression lying down. And I'm not going to focus so much on what the Venezuelan state has been doing, but rather on what grassroots organizations have been doing. So there's a very rich tradition of popular organizing, which of course was deepened under Chavez. And while some popular organizations have fallen or disappeared with the economic crisis, there are others that have actually strengthened themselves and reinvented themselves by finding solutions that make people's lives better in very difficult circumstances. So for example, communes are the kind of the unit cell of local government in what was the plan of building what was called a communal state in Venezuela's socialist project. And other popular organizations, they have been developing all sorts of projects and autonomous production to address the crisis. And for example, in securing access to food, there are also very interesting initiatives in which organized communities in the countryside and the city coordinate directly to supply food, and this way avoid the intermediaries that speculate with the prices. There are also worker-controlled factories. I mean, this was a very booming movement a few years back, which has dwindled, but it's still there. All in all, there are plenty of examples which I encourage people to look up of organizations that are committed to upholding the socialist horizon that was gradually built under Chavez, and as I was saying before, even in the most difficult circumstances, creating and deepening new kinds of social relations. So now, just wrapping up on the role of the left and international solidarity. Of course, first and foremost, the responsibility for the left in the global north is opposing and denouncing sanctions and all other kinds of aggressions against Venezuela and all other countries. This, I think, is fairly obvious and doesn't really need saying to this audience. But then something that I would recommend is that people really do make an effort to get to know and understand the Bolivarian Revolution in the many different stages that it has gone through. I think this is useful not just for Venezuelan solidarity, but also to understand the difficulties that are going to arise in fighting for different kinds of societies in the global north as well. And then, of course, it's indispensable to spread information from on-the-ground sources. Venezuelan Analysis, of course, is one of them. And in reaching out to leftist organizations, I think going back to this idea that knowing the heart and soul of the Bolivarian Revolution, which are these grassroots groups, I think that allows in some cases to engage with the left beyond this speech that we have to enforce international law and so on. And with that in mind, there are several activities that can be thought of. Campaigns, brigades were very popular at some point, and we should think about them again once we go past this COVID pandemic, which allowed people to come and really get to know the reality on the ground and build direct solidarity with popular organizations here in Venezuela. Finally, I'd recommend that everyone follow and support Venezuela Analysis. As you may know, we are an independent media outlet working on the ground in Venezuela to counter the biased narrative from the mainstream media and oppose regime change. And I'd like to stress that we are 100% supported by our readers. And of course, I cannot finish without recommending that everyone supports the Task Force on the Americas. The Task Force on the Americas throughout the years has been incredibly supportive of Venezuela Analysis, and we are very, very grateful for that and for this invitation as well. Thanks again.
Well, thank you, Ricardo. I think Ricardo is tuned in with us, and we want to thank him very much for sending that very good pre-recorded video. Next up, we have a longtime friend of the Task Force on the Americas. I first met Karen in, I guess it was about 2011 when we were there as part of a delegation. She was an outstanding leader and guide for that delegation. She's a tremendous activist. Please talk to us about Honduras. Karen Spring, who is in Tegucigalpa right now.
Great, thank you so much, Rick, and hi everybody, good evening. First, I just want to thank TFA for the invitation. It's always an honor to receive an invitation from a group that has been so important in long-term solidarity work with Honduras and other parts of Latin America, so thank you so much. My name is Karen Spring, and I'm the Honduras-based coordinator for the Honduras Solidarity Network, and I'm calling you from Tegucigalpa, the capital city. So I thought a lot about how I wanted to present to you tonight, and I felt I was invited by TFA, I think last year or 2 years ago, time goes by so quickly, to speak. So I really had a good chance to talk a lot about the trends in the past 11 years in Honduras, basically since the US-backed military coup that overthrew the democratic government, and basically everything that sort of happened since then, so 11 plus years. And so I wanted to actually start tonight's talk by, you know, picking a place to start, and I want to start by looking at the US presidential debate that happened on September 29th, so last week. And I'm not going to get into any of the details about the debate. Obviously, foreign policy was not mentioned very much in that specific debate, but I wanted to talk to you about what was happening in Honduras when that debate was live on TV. And what was happening here was another migrant caravan was gathering. And people were starting their journey from southern Honduras, and they were walking up to northern Honduras, San Pedro Sula, where all of the migrant caravans have originated from, with the exception of a couple that I think have come from El Salvador. But basically it started gathering, and there were tons and tons of young people. And the number of people that were in the caravan this time was estimated to be over or approximately 5,000 people, mostly young people. And they were gathering not because this is some sort of coordinated effort to support Trump or to try and get people to elect Trump, but because of the difficulties and the trend that I spoke about of people fleeing the narco state, the US-backed narco government of Juan Orlando Hernandez, the neoliberal development model that has been rammed down Honduras's throat since 2009, and Haiti and other parts of Latin America, and also the militarism that the United States government continues to support in Honduras and has increased in the last 11 years. And so the caravan is a really great way to look at this presidential debate and look at the two candidates that are up for two presidential candidates in the US, and Trump and Biden's foreign policy in Honduras. And I would argue that both candidates in so many ways have very similar positions on Honduras. They're different in many ways, but I think the overall goal and that has been demonstrated in the last 11 years in Honduras is that they're very much promoting similar foreign policies in Central America, but I know Honduras better, so I'm going to stick with Honduras. I'm going to start by talking about Biden. So Biden as vice president under Obama, obviously the Obama administration supported the coup, and then Biden sort of came to the rescue under the Biden plan, or quote unquote came to the rescue under the Biden plan in 2014, when the US media was reporting on the unaccompanied minors crisis at the US-Mexico border. And what did the Biden plan mean? Basically, Biden promoted, and he's proud of this, and he talks about it, he promoted the Alliance for Prosperity, which meant $750 million. That's just from the United States. That doesn't include the money that was coming from the Inter-American Development Bank, the International Monetary Fund, Canada, and other US allies in the region. And so this Biden plan, or the Alliance for Prosperity, was to address the structural causes of irregular migration through the generation of economic opportunities and improvement of citizens' quality of life in the Northern Triangle countries. And in Honduras, this translated into, and this is sort of their words, this is the Biden plan's points, or the pillars of this plan, was to foster the productive sector, to develop human capital, and to improve citizen security. Now I'm going to translate that into what it actually meant in Honduras. So in Honduras, fostering the productive sector, and basically this entire plan meant using the neoliberal model to basically resolve the problems that the neoliberal model had created in Honduras, and that was mass migration and privatization of across the board of all social sectors and privatization of the National Electrical Energy Company, privatization of education and healthcare. And so just some very specific examples. The Biden plan talked about fostering the productive sector, like I mentioned, and that meant a huge focus on privatizing energy. It meant promoting more dams, wind projects and solar projects, but not the small type, not the ones that are owned by the little like ma and pa owned companies. These are projects that were basically owned by the Honduran oligarchy that have maintained power, that have been US allies for decades in Honduras, that are so deeply entrenched in drug trafficking and corruption. And so energy prices as a result of the Biden plan soared in 2018 and 2020 alone. Energy prices increased by 40%. And so energy costs are one of the things that migrants, when they're at the US-Mexico border, will mention as to why they fled, one of the economic reasons why they're fleeing Honduras. Biden talked about developing human capital with a focus on healthcare. And that meant promoting the privatization of healthcare alongside the dream policies of the IMF and the Inter-American Development Bank and the World Bank at basically taking the already depleted social security system and pushing through a plan to completely privatize healthcare. And then Biden talked about improving citizen security and access to justice, which sounds really great. And it's actually what Honduras needs, but not the way that the Biden plan promoted it. And so there was a huge focus on militarization in the Biden plan in 2014. And this meant that an increase in spending to the military, to the security forces of all of the Northern Triangle countries, from $161 million to $252 million under the Biden plan. And so that meant increased weapons sales for US companies, then weapons being sent to Central America, training for the Honduran military and police, and funding for Honduran security forces across the board, police, military, intelligence apparatuses of the state. And so these same security forces that Biden dumped all this money into would later go on, 2 years after the Biden plan was promoted in Honduras, to kill the environmentalist and indigenous leader Berta Cáceres. In 2016, there were 3 retired and active Honduran military officials that were involved in her murder. That are known so far. That's not even including the intelligence structures of the state that were included in that. And then basically promoting a security or supporting security forces that are so heavily involved in trafficking drugs to the United States. So it's been so clearly laid out by federal prosecutors in the New York Southern District Court that the military, the Honduran military that is trained, funded by the United States, the police, Honduran police forces that are trained and funded by the United States government are very heavily involved in a structural way in trafficking drugs through Honduras and Guatemala and Mexico and up into the US. And so this is the same security forces that Biden dumped millions of dollars in that began shooting protesters when they protested in the streets in Honduras in 2017 and continue to shoot protesters today in Honduras. So that's sort of Biden's foreign policy record in Honduras. And now I want to talk about Trump's foreign policy record in Honduras, which is kind of chaotic to understand because you have Trump saying a bunch of things and the really pro-Trump or his allies inside key institutions in the government. And then you have the New York Southern District Court saying other things, but generally there's some things that are pretty consistent that I want to mention. So obviously with Trump, he has been such a strong supporter of Juan Orlando Hernandez. Many people believe this is because Juan Orlando Hernandez and other governments like the Mexican government and the Guatemalan government have basically done what he has wanted to promote his racist immigration policies, basically, taking aim at migrant caravans and trying to get rid of DACA, promoting family separations at the border, but also basically using his relationship with Juan Orlando Hernandez to get Juan Orlando Hernandez to agree to the Safe Third Country Agreement, which basically sends asylum seekers to Honduras, one of the most unsafe countries in the world, for people to basically seek asylum here or seek safety here. And so Trump has basically continued this really strong support for Juan Orlando Hernandez, who is an unindicted drug trafficker, an extremely corrupt narco dictator that controls all of the entire government, the judiciary, the Congress. And Trump called him in May 2020 a really nice guy that he encouraged the US media to call and to talk to. And so, that support has continued. Trump has been very, very supportive of Juan Orlando Hernandez, and it's created this confusion for Hondurans because they're like, well, wait a second, Juan Orlando Hernandez is an unindicted drug trafficker, that trafficked hundreds of kilos of thousands of kilos of cocaine to the United States, but Trump's calling him a really nice guy. So, it's really chaotic and hard to understand what's going on being here in Honduras. But, the support that the State Department has, it continues as well, promotes and supports the Honduran institutions. And just a tweet that the US Embassy here in Tegucigalpa tweeted 6 days ago, quote, "We spoke with Attorney General Chinchilla about human rights cases and efforts to combat corruption. We support the Attorney General and the Attorney General's office in their work to strengthen Honduran institutions and the rule of law in Honduras," unquote. There is no rule of law in Honduras. And the Attorney General's office that the United States government continues to support has basically promoted, since 2009, under Obama and under Trump, a 90+% impunity rate in the country. It's an Attorney General's office that has caused Honduras to become one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a journalist, a lawyer, a land defender, an environmentalist, and now a deeply entrenched drug trafficking state. And so, all of the institutions of the Honduran government are controlled by drug trafficking interests. And there's no debate about that. That's been very, very clearly shown. But US support for this government remains. Whether Biden has been, in the past when Biden has had a tremendous amount of influence, and then under Trump as well. So I guess my whole point of starting this talking about this presidential debate is to say that I don't really expect anything US policy under Biden, if Biden wins, to change at all towards Honduras. And I hope we can get into more discussions in the chat about how US policy might change towards other countries. But from Honduras, I don't think that Biden will, I think the window dressing will go up, and I think window dressing will be used, and it won't be as an aggressive and extreme under Biden as it has been with Trump. But I don't see very much changing. And so what does that mean? I'm not telling people not to vote for Biden, and I really don't want anyone to vote for Trump. But I think what that means is that I think that, and the work that TFA has done, the long-term work, I think that is what I want to leave the talk with today is that, we need to continue promoting and demanding a long-term change in US foreign policy, regardless of who wins the elections next month. We need a long-term strategy because Biden certainly is not going to change the trend towards the trend of US policy towards Honduras. And so I do want to mention a couple of really positive things that I see that I think there's a lot of potential that could come in the next couple of months. I think it's really positive that Eliot Engels, who is the former House chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House, lost his re-election. And so now we have some great openings in terms of U.S. foreign policy in that really important Foreign Affairs Committee in the House. And I think that's across the board, whether we're talking about Nicaragua or Honduras or Venezuela or Haiti. I think it's we need to keep pushing for a candidate for Pelosi to put a candidate or put someone in there that is more open to progressive changes in foreign policy. And I hear that there is at least one candidate that is a little bit more open to progressive positions on foreign policy. And then I also want to just direct people to Code Pink's new good neighbor policy, which I'm not going to get into, but I know that TFA supports it. They signed onto a letter that Code Pink is promoting, basically demanding that the United States reconsider their foreign policy towards Latin America. And I encourage people to check out that as ways that we can think about moving forward and think about changing US foreign policy towards Honduras, but all of Latin America after these elections next month. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Karen. We've had 4 wonderful talks, and now we've got, let's take 10 or 15 minutes for questions and answers. Teresa, can you, TFA board member Teresa Camoranesi is going to ask the questions.
Yes, actually, we have kind of a related question for Ricardo, if Ricardo could answer this. I know Karen was talking about Biden, but there is a question. Has Biden indicated that his policy towards Venezuela, so Ricardo, have you read anything about that, will be any better than Trump's? For example, has he mentioned anything about lifting sanctions? And I hope Ricardo's connection is good.
Yeah, let's give it a shot. I'd like to say that all the presentations were very interesting, and again, encourage that people support the TFA so it can continue doing this great work in challenging and forcing a change in US policy towards Latin America. As for and what we can expect under a presumptive Biden administration, I mean, here at Venezuela Analysis, we are very fond of saying that imperialism is a bipartisan affair in the United States. And in the case of Biden, we do have very concrete evidence on that. So a few weeks ago, I mean, Trump, his policy has been very aggressive and very cruel all the time, but his statements are always all over the place. So sometimes he says, he's no longer very confident in Guaido, and Biden has always seized those opportunities to try and out-hawk Trump in his support for the Venezuelan opposition, and in particular for this idiot who proclaimed himself interim president. That isn't to say that there won't be any changes. And even from a hearing a while ago, was chastising Elliot Abrams precisely because we wanted to.
Yeah, I think
change in the fact that the current policy is not working, but in terms of any significant change, as changing regime change as a priority, I wouldn't expect it.
Yeah, thank you, Ricardo. I think we lost a little bit, but I think we got the essence of your response. So thanks very much. If there's another question, maybe turn off the video and so we can just hear the audio. But Teresa?
We also had a question for Pierre. Pierre, what is the role of the NGOs in Haiti in support of neoliberalism? You spoke a little bit about the UN troops there, but what about the NGOs?
Yes, the NGOs on the whole have been part and parcel of the destruction of the people's government in Haiti. And they've played a major role when we look at the coup d'etat, the way that they were part of preparing the coup d'etat against the popular government of President Aristide. They received money directly from the State Department through the NED, National Endowment for Democracy. The Canadian government also funneled a lot of money. The European Union also funneled a lot of money to the private sector. And I'm sorry, I hate to use the term civil society, because in Haiti, it has a very bad ring. It shows groups, NGOs, or other organizations in society that are totally at the service of the U.S. State Department, totally at the service of the French government. The European Union has been terrible in Haiti. And to this day, right now, I see very few of them, if any, denouncing the massacres that are taking place against men, women, and children in impoverished communities. You don't hear any of them say anything about it, or very little. Now, more or less, because there is a lot of organizations such as Task Force on the Americas and other groups like Haiti Action Committee making some noise, then now, and I have to say this, the Haitian people have been using social media a lot, and they are sending horrific videos and photos of the atrocities of their loved ones who are being massacred. Some of them are too horrific, I can share them with you all, but it's terrible what's going on there. So to summarize, the NGOs have been really complicit on the whole in this massive genocidal war against the people of Haiti. As many people in Haiti have been saying, many of the victims on the ground have been saying.
And there was another question, Pierre. I'll address this to you also. I mean, you spoke about the history of solidarity of Haitians for other freedom revolutions in the Americas. And can you talk about solidarity now, or maybe lack of, with other leftist or progressive countries of the region? Specifically?
Yes, we've had a number of good exchange. For example, the Cuban government on the issue of healthcare. Cuba has been just phenomenal. And when President Aristide was in office, President Aristide is the one who restored diplomatic relations with Cuba. And he earned the enmity of Senator Jesse Helms. Many of you may remember him. Some of the younger people may not know him, but he earned the enmity of the US government because they didn't want him to do that. And as a result of this by-country accord, whereby Cuba sent in medical people to help Haiti, and Haiti sent students to learn in Cuba, and this has continued to the present. But however, it's not being used to its full potential by the current neoliberal government since the coup of 2004. We've also benefited, for example, the position of Venezuela has been fantastic. Venezuela had refused to recognize the coup government that took place in 2004. There have been also the CARICOM countries after the coup have taken a strong stand. They have taken a strong stand not recognizing the coup in Haiti. However, I wish that the positions had remained very strongly in solidarity with the grassroots movement in Haiti that is fighting today, because the US is a big bully. And so when the US decides to put terrible pressure on countries, by the way, I have to also mention South Africa. South Africa was tremendous after the coup in supporting the Haitian government, the government of President Aristide and his family. So there have been a lot of solidarity back and forth. But whenever these actions of solidarity take place, the US government steps in with the European Union and France, Canada, and use their imperialist weight against those countries that want to work with each other and help each other develop in terms of solidarity. And also groups in the US that want to extend to work in solidarity for the people. I know many of the groups here have faced the brunt of retaliation by the US government. And I'm tipping my hat to the Venezuelan, to the people who stood in solidarity, who went to the Venezuelan embassy and said, no, you will not do this to the Venezuelan people.
Thank you.
I'll stop right there.
Thank you. As you can imagine, we've had a number of questions about COVID and the COVID environment. And Nan, there have been a couple of questions about the specifics of the response in Nicaragua to COVID and how it's doing there.
Yeah, it's doing great. Basically, COVID is pretty much, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, COVID is pretty much over with. We hit our peak in May. We've had, I think, something like 151 deaths, lowest mortality rate in Central America. The US media simply picked up on all of the opposition lies that are paid for with your tax dollars that go in all the Nicaraguan press and then is picked up and is in the Washington Post and the New York Times and unfortunately even Democracy Now! I think that the thing that really helped Nicaragua was that we have such a good preventive public health care system. And they got on top of it right away, really encouraged people to, as soon as they had any symptoms, to, these are the things you should do. Unfortunately, because of the lies in the media in Nicaragua, there was a percentage of people who believed those lies and did not go to the hospital when they should have, so had a much more severe case or died. And Nicaragua is right now contemplating various laws that you have in the United States, and one of them, cyber laws, cyber criminality laws, which I think might actually be able to deal with when people are telling those kind of lies that are actually causing health issues.
Thanks, Nan. In response, or kind of like as some follow-ups to Karen about impunity, we had a question earlier about the Berta Cáceres trial and any updates, and particularly there was a about David Castillo, who is, I think, the only intellectual author who was actually on the dais there, and his judge has recently been transferred, or one of the overseeing judges. But do you have any updates on that trial?
Sure. So the Berta Cáceres, the trial against one of the only accused intellectual author of Berta Cáceres' murder will likely proceed in the next couple of months. The defense team for David Castillo, who's a very powerful person in Honduras, especially with the support he gets from a very powerful family involved in the banking industry here, they're trying to delay it. And we're not really sure why they're trying to delay, but they keep doing everything in their ability to delay the trial. I think they want to catch the government, or they want to catch the other parties, like, sort of like as they're unprepared. And they're also trying really hard to get David Castillo out of pretrial detention. They're doing everything they possibly can. So, but it's expected that the trial will proceed. There was an odd movement of a judge, like you mentioned, but that I think was seen as an effort to stop the trial from stop the case from going to trial. It was also an effort to maybe get him released, but it didn't work. And so the trial will proceed, and he was not released. So but COPIN, Berta Cáceres' organization that she co-founded, is asking people to stay very close to basically any updates about the trial. It'll be very important, and it's absolutely really important for all of Latin America, because so often when crimes are committed against environmentalists or land defenders across all of Latin America, very, very few intellectual authors are brought to justice. And this is a very important case for all of Latin America, because it's one of the few cases where we've seen and not had to wait 10 years for it, basically, that the Honduran state, that's under tremendous pressure, is actually trying to put an intellectual author of Berta Cáceres in prison. And And so I encourage people to watch the Honduras Solidarity Network's Facebook, our Twitter. We'll be posting very frequently. And also TFA has been really important as well in putting pressure on that case as well. So be alert in the next couple of months.
And there was another COVID question for about Venezuela, and it said about statistics, maybe in comparing the COVID fatalities in Venezuela to the Lima countries, where they had so much more incidents of COVID and fatalities, Lima countries, Peru, Chile, Ecuador. And I heard a phrase today, Lima Club is almost a death club. But do you see a connection or a disconnection between the policies or Ricardo, do you have any comments about the differences between the way COVID has been addressed in Bolivarian style?
Yeah, I think this more or less coincides with what Nan was saying before about Nicaragua. The Venezuelan government was very proactive in getting on top of things even before there was a confirmed case. So this was in early March. And they immediately shut off the airspace, they shut off the borders. And for example, Colombia only did it, I think, 3 weeks later, and Brazil, I think a month later, was still getting flights from the US. So that was one component, this very quick reaction. Another one is also the way healthcare has been developed here under the Bolivarian Revolution, with, of course, advice from the Cubans. And they have this mission they call Barrio Adentro, so with clinics in the most popular and densely populated neighborhoods where they have very good primary care. And additionally, they've also been developing technology, for example, to deliver bonuses for people and stuff like this. And they use this to have a survey so that people with symptoms would fill the survey, and then the government would send medical teams to the location and avoid having people go to hospitals. So I think the combination of the quick reaction and this healthcare that really goes very deep into the popular neighborhoods helped stopping the situation from getting out of control.
Okay, thank you, Ricardo. I think we're running out of time, and there's still a number of more questions, so we'd have to, I'm being told that we should start to wrap it up. I believe that we can, well, apologies to all who have their questions left hanging, but we can maybe send those questions on to the people that you've addressed them to. For example, some of our high school teachers who wish to get some resources, etc. Maybe we can follow up on that with the list of the questions, some of those questions to the people who they were directed to.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Teresa. I think we've already run over a little bit on the time schedule. Of course, we could go on for hours, but we all have other things and commitments that we've got to get back to. Probably we should wrap it up at this point. And the people who are really interested, we are going to be sending out a lot more information to you. We want to thank the guest speakers we've had today. They've all been wonderful. We want to thank the people for attending, and we want to thank you for supporting TFA over these many years and continuing to support TFA and to support the organizations and the people, the activists that we've had with us today. So again, we will be sending more information in the mail, and I think Teresa's got a great idea. We will write up some of those questions, and we will see about getting answers to the individuals who have sent them. So with that, I think we'll wrap up our webinar, and thank you very much. There's a great need. The need's going to continue whatever happens in November. The TFA is going to be continuing to work hard, and please join us, and we'd love to work with you. So good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Night.
Nice.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah.
TFA. Well
Yeah,
done.
thank you. Hey, Therese, yeah, Pierre, Ricardo, Nan. It's been great. Karen, thank you very much. Yeah, it was really nice, and we'll be in touch. We'll follow up. If there's any additional information you want to send to me to include in the email that we're going to be sending to people, don't please send that on. Otherwise, we'll prepare something, and maybe I'll prepare something and then send it to you so that you can see it. But thanks very much for being part of this this webinar, this first TFA webinar, first but not last.